Imagine, for a moment, an elegant room during the Victorian era. Walls covered in dark wood. The sound of an antique clock slowly marking the passing of time. Women wearing impossible dresses, tight corsets, and social rules even tighter than the corsets themselves. And in the middle of all this, doctors, completely serious, treating a mysterious female illness. An illness called hysteria. But the strangest part was not the diagnosis. The truly surreal part was the treatment. Because, yes, the origin of modern vibrators is connected to one of the most curious, uncomfortable, and fascinating chapters in the history of medicine. And what is even more incredible is that for a very long time, nobody seemed to consider it sexual. The word hysteria comes from the Greek word hystera, meaning uterus. For centuries, many doctors believed that the female uterus had an almost magical influence over a woman's body and mind. If a woman felt sad, it was hysteria. If she felt anxious, hysteria. If she cried too much, became angry, suffered insomnia, felt empty, irritable, or simply bored with everyday life, hysteria. Even something as natural as female desire could be treated as a medical symptom. And this is where one of history's greatest contradictions begins. Victorian society promoted the image of women as pure, delicate beings with almost no sexual desire. Respectable women were expected to be calm, obedient, and emotionally restrained. But human nature does not disappear simply because society chooses to ignore it. Women still had emotions, desires, frustrations, completely natural physical and emotional needs. And many doctors began to believe that the solution to this so-called illness was to perform intimate massages on female patients until they reached what was called a hysterical paroxysm, what we would call today an orgasm. And this is where the story becomes even stranger, because many doctors at the time did not interpret the process as sexual. They considered it a medical therapy, a clinical procedure, something similar to relieving bodily tension. Today it sounds absurd, but for years it was relatively accepted in certain European and American medical circles. In fact, some historians say the treatment became so common that doctors complained about the physical exhaustion caused by performing it manually. And then technology arrived. By the late 19th century, inventors began creating mechanical devices designed to make the treatment easier. The first vibrators. And they looked nothing like modern ones. Some resembled industrial machines. Others worked with steam. Some used hand cranks. And later, electric versions appeared. Enormous, intimidating devices powered by early electricity. What is truly fascinating is that vibrators were among the very first electrical household devices in history, even before many vacuum cleaners or electric irons. And here comes another strange detail. They were advertised publicly, without scandal, without censorship, without hidden meanings. Old magazines featured elegant advertisements promising relaxation, nervous relief, and improved female health. Everything was wrapped in refined medical language. Victorian society lived inside a massive contradiction. Sex was taboo, yet devices clearly designed to produce female pleasure were openly sold, as long as nobody called it pleasure. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of all. The way societies often disguise the things they are afraid to name directly. Because behind the origin of vibrators lies something much deeper than a strange invention. It is a story about control, about the historical difficulty of accepting female sexuality as something natural. For centuries, male pleasure was treated as obvious and expected. Female pleasure, however, was often ignored, feared, or transformed into illness. That is why so many normal emotions ended up inside imaginary medical diagnoses. Hysteria became a kind of catch-all explanation for anything society did not understand about women. But over time, medicine began dismantling those ideas. Hysteria stopped being considered a real disease. Psychology evolved. Human emotions and sexuality became better understood. And vibrators slowly stopped hiding behind medical language. They transformed from therapeutic devices into openly recognized objects connected to pleasure and sexual wellness. And that transformation also reflects a huge cultural shift. Because even today, sexuality still carries taboos. But we no longer live beneath the same silence and repression of the Victorian era. And perhaps the greatest irony is this. One of the objects most associated today with female liberation was born inside a society obsessed with repressing female desire. Almost as if repression itself accidentally created the very thing it feared. And maybe that is why this story still fascinates people today. Because behind those elegant Victorian offices, absurd diagnoses, and strange mechanical devices, there was something deeply human. The eternal tension between control and freedom. And perhaps 100 years from now, some of our own modern beliefs will also seem strange. Because humanity is always changing. But one thing seems to repeat itself throughout history. Societies may try to hide desire, rename it, turn it into shame or illness. But they never truly make it disappear. And while Victorian doctors believed they were treating a mysterious female disorder, without realizing it, they were participating in the beginning of a quiet revolution. A revolution that would eventually change the way we speak about the body, pleasure, and freedom forever. And did you already know this story? Let me know in the comments because I read them all. And if you enjoy documentaries about strange, mysterious, and fascinating moments in human history, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Because the next story might be even more unbelievable.